The number of Kansas farmers that can't pay their loans reaches a 9-year high. And it's turnaround week at the State House. What bills survived this halfway mark of the 2019 session? And which ones are dead for the year? Sort of. Plus, a Wichita politician on trial for wire fraud and money laundering finally has his day in court. But will the jury take his side? That and more is what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kansas Week. I'm Anthony Powell, in for Pilar Pedraza. Former state senator and current Sedgwick County Commissioner Michael O'Donnell spent this last week in a federal court fighting for his freedom. The federal government says he defrauded campaign donors using their money to buy friends. Michael O'Donnell faces 23 counts of wire fraud and 3 counts of money laundering for checks he wrote to men he calls staffers, but who the prosecution calls friends he wanted to impress. Prosecutors concentrated on a series of checks O'Donnell wrote to staffers they said didn't do any work to earn the money, and 2 checks he wrote to staffers in what he calls a bonus, only to have them immediately turn around and hand the same amount of money back to him in what O'Donnell said was reimbursement for his ski trip. He called the ski trip a bonus for the staffers and the check handover just a way to make sure everything was in order for the official campaign finance reports. O'Donnell took the stand in his own defense Thursday, becoming emotional as he described how the case has affected his family, especially his mother, who the prosecution subpoenaed to testify against him. O'Donnell told jurors, "I did not steal from my contributions to enrich myself. I did not falsely document any campaign expenditures. I abided by the rules of the Kansas Governmental Ethics Commission, but for some reason, the U.S. government has charged me with crimes they've never charged in Kansas before." Now, the case went to the jury Friday afternoon. To help us take a deeper look at this week's topics, I'm joined by the Honorable Phil Journey, a judge on the 18th District Court in Kansas, and by State Representative Jim Ward of Wichita. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. As we speak, the jury is deliberating this case, and I was talking to Pilar last night. She's been covering it daily for Cake News, and she says it really boils down to one word: intent. There's no doubt that O'Donnell wrote the checks. He admits it. But was his intent for personal benefit or to benefit the campaign? Any thoughts, Phil?
Okay, I did a little legal research, and basically most of the charges are under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1956. And it requires knowing that property involved in a financial transaction represents the proceeds of some unlawful activity, and in fact is derived from that unlawful activity. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a little more complicated than that. From the news reports I've read, the defense has basically wrapped themselves with, this isn't a violation of Kansas law. It's not illegal activity. It's not a violation of federal law. So, the jury's deliberating as we record the show.
Right.
I think Mr. Ward told me they just completed closing and arguments. So I expect this will go on for another, I don't know. This is the worst part of a trial. And we're both trial lawyers before I was a judge and while he's a state legislator. And waiting for that jury to deliberate, you can never tell how long they'll take or what they're going to do. And
when I was a news reporter, I used to hate this question: how do you think the jury is going to decide? But I'm going to ask you, it just seems like there's a lot of gray in this case, Jim.
I'll take the devil's advocate. I think that whenever you have a middleman, where if these were legitimate campaign contributions, why do I need a middleman? Why wouldn't I just write this check? And there are some occasions when you can write checks to yourself for mileage reimbursement, for food reimbursement when you're traveling, for those kinds of things. And if it's legitimate, why do I need a third-party filter? I do think that this is an interesting case, and I think the outcome will be we will have better ethics laws in Kansas as a result, whatever the jury decides today.
Well, and some of the allegations were, that when I read the complaint, that basically he wrote someone a check as a campaign expense, and then they gave him the money back. And that one is the question. We'll see what the jury answers.
Right. A lot of the discussion during the O'Donnell trial is focused on the practice of using retainers to keep valuable staffers that they don't want to lose, even if they don't currently have work for them. And you both have run multiple campaigns. Do you know anything about this type of practice?
You know, the thing that astounded me the most was the amount of money he raised in the 2 campaigns, which was, like over $500,000.
Right.
Which, I mean, that's like let's just go run for the United States Senate with $500,000.
Right.
I couldn't believe it when I read that number.
In my campaigns, I do pay people to put up yard signs sometimes. You pay people who create the printing,
Sure.
but it's a direct fee for services. You tell me how much your services are, I either agree or not agree. This idea of saying I'm going to keep my yard sign person on retainer, I think, again, it's a good question for the jury to decide. Is that reasonable based on all the facts surrounding the money?
Do you think it will be, I mean, this is a complex case. Do you think it will be tough for jurors to boil it down and come to a consensus?
There's a lot of counts, and
Yeah.
each count must be resolved unanimously, or else it's hung on that count.
Right, right.
I think they fundamentally will come down to whether or not this passes the stink test.
Okay.
And if it doesn't pass the stink test, they'll find a way to make it guilty. And if it does pass the stink test, or if they blame the process of not having good ethics laws in Kansas rather than the person, they'll walk in.
All right. Well, we shall see what happens. Moving from the courthouse to the State House, this week marked the official halfway point of the 2019 legislative session. It's the week when bills have to be passed out of their house of origin or be blessed to survive. Of course, budget bills are exempt from this deadline. Turnaround week was short in Topeka, with lawmakers going home Wednesday evening after adjourning a day early. They spent their time before leaving debating a flurry of bills on the House and Senate floors. Among the legislation that won approval to move on to the next step, a House bill requiring regular audits of state tax incentives for businesses to determine which ones are bringing the state more money than they're costing in lost taxes, and another making it easier for doctors to fight sexually transmitted diseases by being able to immediately contact an infected person's partner and offer treatment. It's specifically designed to help treat increasing cases of chlamydia. Moving out of the Senate, a bill requiring the foster care contractors to notify the state within 24 hours of a child disappearing from custody. And a bill reducing the number of emergency drills schools have to perform each year to just 9 or 1 per month. This comes after the addition of active shooter, fire, and tornado drills required schools to hold some sort of drill almost once every 11 days of the school year. Okay. So some of these bills Kansans have been pretty outspoken about, especially the one requiring more openness, I should say, from the Department of Children and Families. Any thoughts about that specific bill?
Well, I think that one's pretty much a no-brainer. I think what's really important where we're at right now at this halfway point in the legislative session is what has not been addressed.
Yeah.
And all the big questions are out there hanging. School finance, the tax increase, decrease, however you want to describe it. I had several what I thought were really good bills this year that I've taken years researching, and I can't get them out of committee. And the fact is, anything that costs money is all bottled up because they don't know what the end result's going to be.
What are you saying? There's gridlock at the legislative
no,
level?
No, I don't think it's gridlock. I think it is more like the log jam is there, and school finance is the log that has to be broken free in what they work at.
Right.
The Senate has hearings scheduled on that next week, so we'll see what pops out of those. The Speaker blessed 20 bills and sent them so they're exempt from this calendar. I'm trying to get a couple of mine blessed, but I don't think I'll get that done in the Senate. So we'll see.
You were saying before we started taping that you've been frustrated this session.
Well, and I think I can echo what Representative Ward says, that it's as slow as it's ever been.
Really?
I've
got a term for it. Do nothing Republican legislature.
Don't blame your buddies. I know.
Well, let me finish. They have done nothing. We have 46 days out of a supposedly 90-day session. I'm on the K-12 Budget Committee, which is where a school finance bill would come through. I don't think we've met a dozen times this year. We haven't addressed school finance to address the court order where we have a deadline of April 15th. We haven't had a debate or a hearing on Medicaid expansion. They won't even do a bill that I think would pass 125 and 40 to nothing, which would take out an exemption that currently is in law that prohibits a spouse from charging their spouse for abuse and a crime. They haven't done a whole range of things. We have a non-discrimination law for LGBTs. We should be talking about medical marijuana. We should be talking about the highway plan and how we redo that. What we have done is name a road and put a new personal license plate on the road. It is unconscionable that they have done this waste of time. The taxpayers are paying us to be up there to do work.
Phil?
You
Any
know,
response to that?
there is work being done. It may not be the work Representative Ward wants, but there's work being done. And I think on our next topic, we'll see where part of the roadblock comes from.
No, as we mentioned, budget bills aren't included in this deadline. For the layperson out there who doesn't understand the process, what is the reason behind that, if you can explain that?
Well, I've always said that when I die, I want to be buried at the Capitol, because nothing ever dies.
That's true.
Okay?
That's
and
right.
while we're talking a turnaround, and a lot of bills did die and will not get resurrected, there are a number of procedural ways that a majority of people can save ideas. A bill is not as important as the idea contained in it. What we've done is, because budgets change, and also that's the only thing under the Constitution we have to do in the session, that's why that's given a special status. Also, the tax committee is given a special status, and federal and state affairs, which is basically any kind of alcohol, abortion,
Sex and sin.
sex and sin.
Yeah.
Those are special committees that can exempt bills from other deadlines.
Okay. All right. Well, again, a lot of bills didn't make it past this week's deadline, and some lawmakers are crying foul about that. Bills that didn't get final approval on either the House or Senate floor this last week are considered dead for the year. Among those, a bill that would have automatically registered all eligible Kansans to vote, and a bill that would have made spousal sexual battery as illegal as stranger sexual battery. Some lawmakers were so upset about the bills that didn't move forward or receive a special blessing from leadership, keeping them alive despite the deadline, they took to Twitter to list them all. Newly minted Democratic Representative Stephanie Clayton wrote, "It's a matter of priorities. If you have the power to determine the calendar, if you think that something is important, then it gets run. And if you don't think it's important, it doesn't get run, and that is the way it is." While freshman Representative Brandon Woodard simply listed on his Twitter account all the bills that didn't survive the House. And Phil, you had several domestic violence bills that you were lobbying for that didn't make it past turnaround day either. And again, that's frustrating for you.
Well, we'll see. One may get blessed. One was to help people get their driving privileges restored. Another one, two of them are to implement what's called staggered sentencing, which seems to be working really well in reducing recidivism in domestic violence and in DUI cases. You know, everybody went into this session talking about let's do criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
And, you know, the only thing I've seen is basically reinventing the wheel and creating another commission to study it. The other four bills dealt with domestic violence, enhancing penalties for those that violate restraining orders, to change the way we sentence repeat offenders, to try to help reduce, to define what is called a predominant aggressor for the law enforcement, so they have some help through looking at the law in what to decide at the scene, and then to do a threat assessment so that the judge knows, oh my gosh, maybe we better keep this one for a while, you know, and set a higher bond than on your average run-of-the-mill case, because right now there's just like a number set and everybody gets the same number, and it really shouldn't be that way. We've had two tragic deaths, homicides, one in Derby, another one in Wyandotte County, where repeated domestic violence, the victims were, one was shot with the restraining order in her pocket after he got out of jail from violating the restraining order previously. So, you know, it's a real problem that needs to be addressed.
Jimmy, we're joking in our last segment that nothing ever dies. So just how important is it really to survive a turnaround day? Are these bills truly dead?
It's much, much more difficult. Think of a funnel. Each time we go past the deadline, it gets smaller and smaller and harder and harder.
Yeah.
And I want to make a point. Certainly you can always play it off as partisan, but I've been in legislature. I remember when conservatives would stand up and debate their ideas. When Senator Phil Journey was there, he didn't hesitate to debate his ideas from a conservative philosophy. That's not what's going on. They're just simply not bringing bills to the floor that might be controversial or might be open to amendments or amendment's a fancy word to say other ideas. And that's what's really disappointing, because there are a lot of ideas that the people would like to have discussed.
And what do you attribute the change in culture to? You said it's changed tremendously. What do you attribute that to?
I really think it has to do with the insecurities of the leadership, that they're not comfortable that they can hold their caucuses to the line, to toe the line, to get the bills out that they want, whether they be running for the U.S. Senate or the U.S. Congress or whatever their next step up the ladder. And they're not confident that their ideas first intellectually will carry the day or politically. And therefore, they think the better strategy is to close down the process so that that doesn't happen.
Well, you know, you have yet to have a vote that actually will be able to let people count noses on how many moderate Republicans there really are.
I think that's exactly why we haven't had those bills, because they're not sure where the votes are, and there are too many moving parts, and it can get away from them quick. In the last 2 years, it got away from them several times when we passed the repeal of Brownback's experiment, we passed Medicaid expansion, we passed due process for teachers, we passed some transparency laws that they thought it got away from them. And so I think they're using the process to limit that debate so it doesn't get away from them.
And I imagine you don't concur with that.
You know, I'm not there.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's so different when you're inside,
right,
watching the way the committees work and knowing the details and the fine print of what these committee chairmen are deciding to do, because each committee chairman is the king or the duke, really. But you know, the way the Senate changed its rules of operation, now they are all beholden to the president.
Gotcha.
Where in the Senate it was not that way when I served there. We had different rules.
Nor when I served there.
Right.
Yeah, and it was a committee of 9 that decided who was a chairman and who did what. And so, you know, it's a lot different than when I was there in how it operates. But that's all inside baseball stuff that you really have to be there to get.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, the growing feud between Democratic Governor Laura Kelly and Republican Senate President Susan Wagle heated up this week over taxes and spending bills. Governor Laura Kelly's office says she has an open-door policy for lawmakers, but Speaker Ron Reichman told the Topeka Capital Journal recently he's only had one conversation with her, while Senate President Susan Wagle told the paper she's only had 2 face-to-face meetings with Kelly, compared to weekly meetings with Republican governors. From day one of the 2019 session, Wagle and Kelly have been at cross purposes, as Wagle has pushed for an immediate catch-up on a missed payment to the state's pension plan and reworking the state's tax law to align with new federal law and again allow some Kansans to itemize their deductions. But the governor has asked for a year with no additional spending other than the required school funding, as her budget director and his office work to figure out just where the state stands financially. Despite several months of above-average tax collections last year, January's taxes came in below expectations. Wagle's tax bill has passed out of the Senate, and she expects the governor to veto it. So here's a question I imagine we could spend probably half an hour on, Jim. How hard is it to get Republican lawmakers and a Democratic governor to work together?
Now, this is my 16th year, and I spent well, it's been longer than that, because I spent all 8 years with Kathleen Sebelius, all 8 years with Sam Brownback, and now I'm in with Laura Kelly. This is different than when Kathleen came in. The Republicans gave her here's an example. It is common practice for both chambers to give a governor's bill, even if they don't like it, a courtesy hearing. And then they might vote it down or not pass it. They've refused to give her hearings on bills she's asked for. They played games. They burned up a day of legislature for no reason other than the fact they want to put pressure on the governor later in the session rather than trying to do. And I found it absolutely amazing that Susan said that she had better access with Republican governors. I'm shocked. She's a Republican. I was the leader of the Democrats for 2 years. I met Sam Brownback one time in his office, and it was at a big leadership meeting, never one-on-one. I met twice with Jeff Collier. We had served in the House, so we called him, and he set up a meeting when we asked for one. This is about a very partisan world in Topeka right now. People who just can't accept the fact that Laura Kelly kicked their butt in the last election, and so they're taking it out on her. on a daily basis in the Capitol.
And you were saying the most partisan since you've been in
Yeah, absolutely.
the
Now,
legislature.
we all have our partisan elbows. I've been accused at my time of being partisan.
No.
I know, it's shocking. But we are not doing the people's business. I mean, this has been the most do-nothing legislature, and it all channels back what you called a feud. That this is folks who are angry that Laura Kelly won the election and have not given her ideas a good faith opportunity and votes up or down.
Phil?
Oh
imagine
my
you'd like to
goodness!
weigh in.
Okay, look. When I served in the Senate, we had certain rules that we had to abide by, and one was that no matter how you felt about a bill or a policy, you always addressed your colleague in a respectful way. And when you're in the debate, you referred to the governor by their term of office. And you had to show that respect, that even if you don't respect their position, you still have to respect the office that they hold. And this bad talk is going both ways, from Kelly's spokesperson talking about the legislature and I almost want to call it the progesterone wars. But it's unfortunate because they're all still talking about the election when they should be talking about policy.
Right.
And they should sit there and, I can remember when, Lana Olin was majority leader in the Senate and Fred Kerr was the president, and, they may not agree, but they still understood their job was to
So
govern.
both of you agree that the culture has changed much for the worse.
I don't know if I would call it worse, but I would say it's not as mature as it once was.
Why the inability to not be able to move past the election?
Here's the problem. Politics is not a zero-sum game where you have to lose for me to win, or I have to win, you know what I mean? That zero-sum. Now, there are some issues that we're never going to agree on, okay? We should have votes on that and move on. But 80% of what we do in the legislature is make the trains run on time.
Yeah.
Make sure that the budgets are met, make sure that the roads are safe, make sure the school doors open, and we have expanded the number of things that are now zero-sum. You have to lose for me to win or the other way around.
Neither side wants to appear weak. Whether it's the governor in her very first year in office or the legislative leadership, neither side wants to appear weak. Somebody has to reach out and do more than speak platitudes to the other side. And that's just not happening.
Because in the end, it's the citizenry that ends up losing out because the big picture is getting lost in this partisan bickering.
Some will gain and some will lose if very little gets done.
Yeah.
Yeah, like school children will lose because we have a lawsuit and we have a deadline to meet that. People who are sick or hospitals are closing because we're not addressing health issues. Roads got potholes because of the winter that aren't getting filled. The people of Kansas are directly affected negatively by this kind of nonsense.
Okay. Well, Kansas lawmakers may need to keep an eye on Kansas farmers as nationwide the number of farm loans in default reached a 9-year high. The Associated Press reports most farm loans come due at the beginning of the year, and this year, more than 19% of FSA direct loans were behind in payment, compared to 16.5% last January. The Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis says the outlook is pessimistic and is predicting a further decline in farm income as crop prices remain low. Grain prices are down because of high yields around the world, and U.S. soybean tariffs on China are hurting the U.S. market. And as we all know, the agricultural market is pivotal to the Kansas economy. So what can be done to help these farmers?
Well, two things I think have been problematic until recently. I'm glad they finally got their act together and passed a farm bill. That took way too long on nonsense. And this tariff war, or the threat of a tariff war, the effect it has on China is a big deal. And there's a whole number of other issues that we could spend some time getting into the depth. But the federal folks have got to get their act together, because when they don't, it has such a major ramification.
Yeah. Look, here's the real problem in the farm sector in Kansas. 2012 was the peak of commodities prices. They're 36% less than what they were just 6 years ago. The cost of production for seed, for fertilizer, is up 300%. The FSA is the lender, it's a federal program for agricultural loans, is the lender of last resort. They will loan money to a farmer when nobody else will. And so if they can't grow crops, and last year was the worst wheat crop in our lifetime because of the drought and because we didn't have any snow, and the winter wheat died in the winter. We had like 36% yield when normally Kansas has like 89% yield, good to excellent. We had less than 30% that was good last year. And there's no telling, but it doesn't look like the weather's going to get any better. We've had a little more moisture this year, but that's really important. It is the lowest planting of winter wheat in the last century.
Yeah.
The lowest number of acres planted in the spring.
So just
fall.
a number of factors coming together, kind of in a perfect storm.
It is, and the tariffs do hurt because all of a sudden we're 25% less competitive.
Right.
And the subsidies are nothing compared to what they're losing.
But you know, I've seen a number of interviews with farmers, and they ask them about the tariffs, and they admit they're hurting them, but they think in the long run they'll be of benefit.
That's what they're promised. But I'll tell you what, you go down 96 and you look at the equipment dealer on the way to Hutch, he's got more used junk out there in his backyard of his equipment store than I have ever seen.
And every time they go to the banker and see what the note is and nothing coming in the door,
yeah,
it becomes less and less palatable to accept the argument is, don't worry, it's going to be better in the future. It's not.
If land prices hold, that'll be great. But you know, I just think that the next step is we're going to see a rise in Chapter 12 bankruptcies with farmers. That's what scares me the most.
So it's going to get worse, it sounds like, before we'll get better.
Oh yeah, we ain't hit bottom yet.
I think there's some hope, though, that the president and China seem to at least put a pause on another increase in tariffs.
Yeah.
So that's a very small ray of hope.
Right, because what happens to farmers has a significant trickle-down effect on all of us.
They're used as pawns
Yeah.
in this big international war that doesn't seem to have a goal or an end.
Any ideas about what can fix this situation?
Well,
I know it's very complicated.
If farmers don't plant enough, then prices will rise, commodities will be worth more, at least on our local markets. International markets, it's beyond our control because it's just so much bigger. You know, the world needs our food.
Very good way to wrap up. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for a great show. Thanks again so much. We here at Kansas Week love to hear what you think about these topics. Please email us at kansasweek@kpts.org. I'm Anthony Powell for Pilar Pedraza. Have a great week.